Hi everyone, welcome to this week of HITRUST Secrets. I'm Susan Richards here with Jeff McHugh, Donna Knotson, and Dennis Palmer. Small group today, but definitely in for a lively discussion. So welcome everybody. It's good to see everyone.
Good to see you too.
Hey there.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Does anybody have any specific questions that they wanted to talk through? All right, I have one. I'm struggling on this. It's not specifically a high trust question, but it's more of a philosophical information security program question. Trying to understand how you objectively measure the maturity level of an organization. And the reason why this is coming up is I'm kind of helping other vCISOs understand how to make progress and kind of, like take stock of where they are with their clients and things. And each of them does it differently, which is great because, it's a very boutique kind of relationship that you have with your clients. But I'm trying to figure out if there's a way that I can easily just kind of look in and say, oh, this particular organization is very immature and needs a lot of work to get to where they need to be versus this one, they're a 7 out of an 8 or 7 out of a 10. How do we get them to an 8?
Yeah.
How do we drive it? Just so we can have the discussion 6 months, at a quarterly or 6 months from now review to say, here's where you were and here's where you ended up. And then here's what the next steps would be to get you to the next level of maturity. Obviously, fully mature would be high trust R2, it would be the proof of that maturity. But along the way, what kind of metrics are people using to kind of understand and gauge that?
Hmm.
It's an interesting question. I would say for me, I would probably look at two things: documentation and standardization.
Okay.
Um, Good or bad, it's
Hmm.
if it's written down, at least you know where to start from, and that leads to standardization.
Okay. But like what areas? I mean, how would I, obviously identity and access management is huge. Um, and, what are some of the other things? I know vendor risk management has been a huge topic, especially this year. But, how do I look and say, because I'm assuming I would mostly look at a client and say, okay, well, you know, 10 being you're fully operational, all the efficiencies are built in, and you're understanding, where anything is going wrong, any anomaly very quickly. Whereas a one is you maybe have a certain knowledge, but nothing's written down, nothing's documented, you don't have any kind of standardized process. So along that way, I know I would be looking at their identity and access management. I'd be looking at their vendor risk management.
Mhm.
How are they, especially ones that are partnering with an organization. But
Backup
is
and
it really as
recovery.
simple as looking at the 19 high trust domains and just kind of saying, okay, I'm gonna put the definition of done for each of these, and then I'm gonna kind of objectively evaluate you along the way. It is, I don't want to see everything in a high trust lens necessarily, but is that maybe the right place to make sure that nothing's dropping, or is there something else that people are looking at?
I, I think it makes it much easier because of the standardization of the control set and the risk areas or assessment domains. It makes it easier because those key things you should be looking at, and they're going to
Okay.
vary by organization. But that for me, looking at working with different customers, it's that's one of the things that I see is wide variance in you know even among different types of production systems or administrative systems is they have a standard configuration, good or bad. It's
Hmm.
they know what they have, they know what they don't have, right?
Hmm.
um, Standardized onboarding, standardized offboarding, um, and in some cases it gets down to the nuts and bolts of, do you know what you have?
Hmm.
We know asset management and configuration management are huge areas, which kind of
That's
begs the
right.
TPRM question: if you don't know what you have and you don't know who your vendors are, what are you securing? right?
Right.
So for me, that's the questions I would look
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. When I talked to because I talked to MSPs, to VARs, systems integrators, and some of their end users, but um, I go through something that I call the failure gap. What executives expect, what's really happening in the field, and then what the organization's actually able to govern. And when I look at those three and measure them independently, then I can really drill into the truth. And and that gap, what the executives believe and what's really happening, that's usually pretty big. So
Hmm.
that's not a high trust answer, but that's kind of how I do it. Um, and
Okay.
and and there are a handful of domains. It depends on who you look at, but there are generally 5 or 6 areas of resilience. That's where I go. Um, um, I'd be happy to talk or show you. Maybe I'll show you offline and we can talk about it later if everyone's interested.
Okay. Well, I mean, and I guess that's kind of, looking at resilience, that's kind of the point of information security is really how fast can I bounce back when something
Right.
goes wrong?
That's right.
How soon do I know something's gone wrong? And then how fast do I bounce back?
at.
So,
That
Yeah.
you know,
that's
And I
that can
want
be
to
important.
highlight the when in your statement because it's not if,
It,
it's when.
When
that's
sure.
right.
If you are still, if anybody is still under the impression that it's if, they are playing the wrong game. They really are. It's when it, and you have to look at it like that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, you really do. It's
And yeah, and when the systems go down, so um, that's the event, right? But and my argument is that that system was broken long before the event because
Mhm.
it was able to be broken. So it's just when the event occurred. So it's all the pre-work.
Well, and so it sounds like with the failure gap, you're kind of looking at maybe 5 or 6 different categories
Yep.
of that failure. And then is it an objective measure that you're using where you're saying, I kind of give them a score based on what I see, or is it more of a subjective?
Yes. Well, the way that I do it is 2 different ways. So I do have an objective score to give them, and that's really just the entry level. This is the self-assessment. This is where we are. This is what you think. But I'll go in and explain to them, what it is in the different areas. Let's say dependencies, right? So, what are the dependencies? Um, you and it could be the third party, right? Or
Mhm.
it could be uh, um, internal dependencies as well. Um,
And then I'm assuming that you would have to weigh those based on, and that would kind of be specific to that particular business because, some that
uh,
are fully cloud hosted, their third party risk is going to be weighed heavier as far as the maturity level of where they are with that versus physical security because,
um,
it typically doesn't matter because they don't have a physical office or data center.
yeah, I would tend to agree with that.
Okay.
And you can also go by organizational type, right? So someone who is doing healthcare work is worried about a completely different set of concerns than someone who is in mining or something like that.
Okay. But I mean, they still at the end of the day have, you know, when something happens, how do we know about it and how do we get back on track?
Yeah,
It's
that's
just a
right.
matter of understanding what processes or what different areas they need to look at and what's the most involved for them. So when you do the failure analysis,
Yeah,
how often do you do that? Do you check in like quarterly? Is it kind of an
yeah.
annual thing?
Yeah. Well, so on my end, if we're actually talking about my stuff, yes, it's annual,
Okay.
um, um, but you can take this and apply it. Really, you want to talk to your customers more frequently than that, right?
Right.
So this is just one element of a conversation. You can have 12 conversations throughout the year. I'm just offering one.
Okay. So this would be kind of like you'd have the analysis, you'd kind of go through, okay, here's what you thought, you thought you were a 7 and you're really at a 3,
Yeah,
and let's prioritize the most important things to work on based on your budget, your business, and the particular vulnerabilities around that business or the risks of that
yeah,
business.
yeah, exactly. When we have the conversation, you start with the conversation starts with let's talk about the two or three critical business functions that must stay up. That's where we
It,
start.
it's interesting that you said that because I was going to say one of the things in any of these conversations needs to be, is the IT the business or does the IT enhance the business, right? And so you get into system criticality and, you know, does your system have to work well for your system to function properly, or does your system just have to function for your business to function? And where does that scale meet, right?
Mhm.
You can do a lot of things manually, right? Your efficiency and your productivity and your profit ideally is driven by a highly efficient system that's enhancing the workers that are doing that. Or if it's not, if it's a, a complete IT solution, that's where you're gaining the revenue by that system operating versus a supporting type system. In some cases, you can have a less than optimal system. So, the binary is it's working, right? Maybe not well, but it's working. And so when you look at criticality and to that to the revenue generation of the organization, I think, or survivability of the organization, I think that's important.
Mhm. But
Interesting.
also then not ignoring key operational systems. And I say that because oftentimes people will look at customer systems, immediately, what is their uptime obligation by contract? And those, obviously there needs to be a lens for that. But if
Mhm.
your payroll system goes down
Right.
or
Yeah.
your invoice system for vendors are interrupted, you're going to be dropped pretty quickly by a lot of
Yeah,
people who depend on you for funding. Your
absolutely.
vendors will probably actually have maybe a little bit more wiggle room for you. Your employees, if you're not paying your employees or you've got some sort of a breach on your employee payment, that's going to end really badly.
Hmm.
Um,
Right.
so people need to think beyond just what is our customer system and our customer contract and look at the security parameters across your organization and know that also your systems and your organization can be infiltrated from lots of directions, not just one.
Right.
um, that's where using I'll go back to HITRUST, using the HITRUST mentality to evaluate across your organization. And Dennis, you saw probably us doing that before, way back when I was at Craneware, because the CIO at the time really he was embracing HITRUST and wanted those controls on the operational level. And we actually explored um, trying to see if we could use HITRUST on an operational basis, which wasn't available at the time. Who knows if it'll be there in the future? But
Right.
that he looked at that and said, "These are strong controls. I want to make sure that there's a level of obligation." And he, I think, really liked the assurance part of it, the audit part of
Mhm.
it,
Mhm.
to make sure that everybody was towing the line across the board, and not just on the product side.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's very valid points. And it comes down to, like I said, criticality and the operational uptime. You know,
Mhm.
you may be able to get by with a 12-hour outage on your payroll system, but if you're producing content, 12 hours means you're going to be looking for a new employer.
I just dropped in the chat. We deal with a lot of, startups. We're the first people that they've come to, right? They come with relatively blank slate. Here are tools, relatively immature processes, and we've used COBIT 2019 before. It's just
Okay.
a nice way to sort of organize our thoughts. Basically, over the course of 2 weeks, we'll complete interviews, and basically we want to get to the objective, but we can at least get scores by subjectively going through interviews and saying how well is a process implemented and where does that get you on a maturity level. So it's centered around capability and maturity, and you can divide it up. We had some, a few of the high trust domains come up, but some of the core domains when it comes to security, whether it's disaster recovery, business continuity, you can change the lens of what you're looking at, but the capability versus maturity scoring system for COBIT is often helpful to quantify.
Okay.
And then Susan, I believe at the start you said you want to show how we're progressing, right? So you can show, okay, the capability of this process or the maturity of this process improved, and this is how. So you can, through subjective scores, you can create objective, you can show objective progress,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
The other thing is, and this is one of the quirks of high trust assessments, is because we tend to be very system specific, using a high trust assessment organizationally can cause challenges because if you're not tailoring the control set properly, and that's where some of the other frameworks, if you took the tailoring off of a high trust R2, it would work great organizationally. I've set the organizational level at a level 2 and run that way. And that way you would disconnect from the system perspective of it and look at the risk controls as opposed to
Mhm.
Primarily, system level type things.
Well,
You
yeah.
still get a good picture, but they're like you said, there's other like COBIT is good for some of those things. ISO 27001, from
And that's what I was like NIST or something like that, do you kind
yeah,
of run it
yeah,
against a
like
framework pretty quickly and just, be able to
yeah,
say, okay, you've got this at this particular part of your business is, functional, but not necessarily operating as efficiently as it could
right,
versus this one is stellar, don't have to worry about it. It's an
Yeah.
automated, it's almost like set it and forget it kind of pieces of it. And that's
yeah,
what I'm saying, walking into a client and seeing that piece of it, am I blind to where they may have not been as due diligent on another aspect that's key for information security, not necessarily to, from a compliance perspective, but really from a security perspective and looking at that so that, it's like, well, we had everything, but then we forgot this one section and that was enough that we fell down because, somebody asked
yeah.
the wrong question and all of a
And
sudden we're like, oh wait, that's
uh,
been compromised for years.
well, either asking the wrong question or not asking the question.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think that's what scares us more than anything, which is why you see a lot of things like we've had a lot of questions on AI and things like that because so many organizations are utilizing it and so few people know what their people are doing with it.
Hmm.
And so some of these C-suites are sitting there like, okay, what are we doing with it, and how do we make sure that we even know what's going on? You
Right.
know, it's the old shadow IT of the late '80s, early '90s, or well, late '90s, where you have entire pipelined structures where people don't have visibility into it because it's not been integrated.
True that.
Stovepipe was where I was looking for, not pipeline. I'm gonna have more coffee.
Well, and it's funny because one of the things I've been struggling with this week is Microsoft and first off, just understanding the difference between Purview and Defender and Intune because they all have a security aspect to them. But Microsoft can give you a false sense that everything's working fine because it'll be like, hey, nothing's showing up as far as there's no devices out of compliance. And you're like, oh, great. And then you realize that that's because there's no compliance policy set. And it's not giving you this glaring warning that, hey, by the way, there's no policy set for these devices. It's just, there's nothing out of compliance. And you're like, oh, all
Right.
devices are compliant of a
Yeah.
policy that doesn't exist. So it's very misleading in that respect. And I've been trying to use like even sensitivity labels this week and trying to understand, what for just kind of diving into Microsoft data loss prevention, and there's some of it that it just looks like everything's great. Hey, we have no reports of any, social security numbers being leaked out of your organization. And then you realize, well, that's because there's not a policy that's checking to see
It's not
if
enabled.
anybody's sending. And you're like, well, could you tell
Mhm.
me that there's no policy as opposed to telling me there's nothing happening? So it's I've been
Mhm.
kind of struggling with that because it almost seems like it's trying to be like, yeah, everything's great. It's like, no, it's not. It's not there yet. I mean, the maturity is at a 2, I'm aware that something needs to happen, but nothing has even been implemented, never mind implemented, in an insecure way or a haphazard way. So I'm just trying to
It's
figure all
like
that
it's a,
out.
it's like those firewall rules where the last line is
Any,
backslash
any.
a all. Yeah.
Yes. And you see all these other great ones, and then you're like, hey, there's nothing, there's nothing being stopped. Well, it reminds me, I overheard at the airport, this was a couple of years ago, I overheard at the airport somebody doing a sell on their system, and they were saying, that they were just absolutely everything was great because they had no false positives. And I was tempted to go, excuse me, could one or two false positives would make me feel a
Mhm.
little bit better because,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't have false positives because I don't have anything installed. Yeah.
I used to regularly remind the teams of that because they'd go, well, should we put this on? It's small. And I said, and I used to be consistent about this across everything, not just security, but even health and safety stuff. And I've said, put it on there. If you investigated it and it wasn't an issue, great. Your system's caught with something that looked unusual, maybe a little suspicious. You looked into it, it wasn't, that's fine. Because there are very few assessors who are going to believe a squeaky clean background and
Yes,
not just once, but multiple times in a row. That's just
exactly.
unlikely.
It, yeah. And
Even,
it,
even a health and safety, if you cut yourself in the kitchen, yeah, put it in there because then you can go back and go, oh, okay, yeah. I mean, this was something that just required a band-aid, but it's because we have a no gray areas policy. Every injury gets reported.
yeah. Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, Donna, it's interesting that you brought that up, is one of the things it allows you to do is if your system uses tuning or heuristics, identifying and evaluating those false positives helps the system to learn so that
Yeah.
Right.
next time it sees it and goes, okay, we saw this last time. Look at these other two things. Is it
Mhm.
really a false positive or is it a misreading? Did we not tune it correctly? Things like that.
Right. Yeah.
Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to HITRUST Secrets.